Welcome to the Deeper Experiences with God podcast. I'm your host, Dave Ripper. My hope is that through conversations, teachings, and practices on the Christian spiritual life, that you might experience an ever-deepening life with God. As we begin, let's take a moment to simply be still and know that God is with you, right where you are, right as you are. Well, hey everyone, I'm Dave, and I'm so grateful you've chosen to listen in to the latest episode of Deeper Experiences with God. And today's conversation is going to explore what a renewed vision for the life and ministry of a pastor is. So whether you're a ministry leader or have relationships with pastors, I think you're going to find this conversation really fascinating. And joining me today is Pastor Matt Erickson. Matt is a pastor, writer, speaker, and disciple of Jesus. And since 2010, Matt has served as the senior pastor of Eastbrook Church, which is an urban, multiracial church in the greater Milwaukee, Wisconsin area. It's a wonderful church where friends of ours attend and just rave about Matt and what God is doing in and through Eastbrook. Matt recently earned a Doctor of Ministry from Western Theological Seminary in Holland, Michigan, in connection with the Eugene Peterson Center for Christian Imagination. And if you've listened before, you know I love Peterson, so my interest is already really piqued. And his research is being released in a beautiful new book that's called The Pastor as Gardener, a renewed vision for ministry. Matt and his wife, Kelly, are parents to 3 adult sons and now have 2 daughters-in-law, and they make their home in Milwaukee. And so, Matt, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
It's a real pleasure, Dave. So great to be with you today.
It was fun getting to connect with you over the summer at a pastor's gathering back in the Midwest. I loved your pastor's heart, and I think we come at this vocation and work so similarly. And I love being around really great pastors, and I know that is something that you really model for us. And so, we hung out, I was like, I've got to get Matt on the podcast, and so glad you can be here. But one of the ways I think I've really gotten to know people better is by discovering the sentences that they live by. And so when you kind of take a look at your life, Matt, what sentences have maybe steered the course and the direction of who you are and what you do and who you continue to become?
I love that question, Dave. And when I thought about it in preparation for our time together, there was really 2 sentences that just leaped out to me. One is the words of John the Baptist in John 3:30 has really been a guiding direction for me in my disciple life, following Jesus, and then also in my ministry life, where John says, "He must become greater, I must become less," or "He must increase and I must decrease." And that phrase, that sentence has really helped me think through, okay, my life is about Christ being formed even more fully in me. And even as a pastor, it's not about me. It's about Jesus becoming increasingly seen. So that's been tremendously guiding for me. I pray that over the congregation and over my sermons every Sunday. And I had somebody one time come to me after a message. They said, "I may never remember anything you ever preached, but I'm always going to remember that prayer that comes from John the Baptist's lips." So I was like, well, that's pretty good. You know, if you don't remember the sermons, but you remember that prayer, I'm going to be okay with it. And then another sentence that's really foundational for me in the life of ministry, and even beyond that, just in the disciple life, is that our ministry, fruitful ministry, comes from the overflow of our own life with God.
Yeah.
And that has kept me grounded in realizing that if anything good's going to come out of what I'm doing, it's got to come out of a life cultivated with the Lord. And I think we kind of sensed a resonance around some of these ideas, even when we just had conversations this past summer.
Yeah. I love those sentences. And just to lean in a little bit, what does decreasing really look like for you? I mean, that's a great thing for us to pray. And sometimes I've even heard pastors that I think are, I don't want to be too judgmental or throw shade anyone's direction, but it's almost like, hey, I can be as self-exalting as I want to be, but as long as I say that prayer, then I'm set. But what does that tangibly kind of look like for you in day-to-day life to to actually seek to decrease so he can increase or to become less?
I think one thing it definitely doesn't mean is that it's just words. Something, yeah, we slap a bumper sticker on our life to kind of convey something. That's not really true. I think another thing that I've always worried that people would take the wrong idea is that somehow the idea of becoming less means that I'm not important at all or that I'm devalued. So I definitely don't mean that. It's not about, feeling bad about ourselves. But I think what it has looked like for me is, beginning a day in prayer and saying what Jesus taught us to pray: "Let your kingdom come, let your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven." That it wouldn't be about me forming my kingdom, which would be definitely against some of the self-exalting pastors you're talking about, but that I'm really trying to cooperate with the triune God in the day ahead of me, so that his ways, his goodness, his greatness would be seen, and that I would be advancing that sort of thing. It means sometimes I'm in a conversation with someone in our congregation, and I may think, I have an idea of what this person needs.
Mhm.
And even in my prayer life internally, those are the moments where I sort of pause internally and say, okay, Lord, is that really from you? Or is this me imposing my will on this person in the congregation or a friend or a family member? So just trying to release some of that and listen more deeply into what God has. So that's at least a little bit of what that means. Dave, I think I could talk a lot longer about it, but that's a little hint of it.
Yeah, that's great. And it's fascinating, I think, how we actually decrease. I think in a lot of ways, I would interpret that as like somewhat of a death to my own egoic operating system.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to inflate myself. And what's fascinating about John the Baptist, I mean, he really lived one of the most uniquely Christ-like lives of anyone. I mean, he was such a different individual. And I think I'd seen it was Carolyn Aaron's in her forward to Trevor Hudson's book In Search of God's Will, where she said, as we decrease, like John the Baptist, like he became Johnnier as he followed Christ, like more of who he was. And so I started to think about that and in my own self, like lessening that might make me Dave-er or,
Mhm.
madder than you currently are. So I love that.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the things too, as you mentioned, your other senses kind of, if I remember hearing it rightly, but kind of preaching, living, ministering from the overflow of your life with God. What is that like for you?
Maybe you've heard some of these phrases when you were growing up in your faith, or maybe in your background, or somebody listening might have heard this. You can't take somebody a place that you've never gone. And so I think, that calling on us to live out our faith, to enter into the deep territory with God. I can't expect fruitful ministry, or even just the abundant life in my own life, to come out of merely things that I have heard, or ideas I have, or frameworks of ministry. I read this book and now I'm going to do this, and somehow I'm going to bring fruit out of that. It really has to be a lived thing. We have to experience God. This is part of why I love what you're doing with your podcast. We have to experience these things. And as we go deeper with God, I think there's a naturalness of the fruit coming forth from our life. We don't have to force it, it's just something that happens. And so that's part of, I think, what has been something I've held in front of our staff team here at Eastbrook. And when I've talked with other ministry leaders, don't spend so much time trying to force fruit. Send your roots down deep into God and let the fruit come. It is a natural thing. And this is why the gardening imagery has become so profound for me. Is if the soil is tended well, if the plants are planted well and nurtured well, the fruit will come, and it's an overflow.
Yeah, I love that. And let's pick that back up in just a moment. But I'd love for you just share a little bit more about I think the remarkable church that you've been able to pastor the last 15 years, Eastbrook. My wife has actually visited it before when she was hanging out with one of her high school best friends who goes there now, and she just raved about it. She's like, "You would love Matt," and just love the church. And you describe it, I think, as a multi-everything church. I'd be curious, what do you love about your church, and maybe what do you love about what God is doing in the congregation these days?
Yeah, some of what I love about Eastbrook is just the quirkiness of this community. It's a beautiful thing, and I mean that as a compliment. We are a church that was planted about 43 years ago. Actually, more than that now. I have to just think about that. Maybe closer to 45 years ago, and we are a church that intentionally decided to stay within the city of Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a beautiful city. It's also on some of the top 10 difficult lists in terms of disparities between races, one of the most segregated cities in the US. So there's some challenges, but it's a beautiful lakeside, Lake Michigan side city. We love being part of this. And in Eastbrook's early years, I followed a founding pastor who had been here for 30 years before me. And that community had really just poured into the city, also poured into global mission. And so it was really living out that kind of missional church mindset for a really long time. Had poured into international students quite a bit. So because of this, Eastbrook has developed, this kind of multi-ethnic, multiracial identity. We have people from about 30 different nations around the world who are part of our church, as well as ethnicities across the spectrum in our own city. People from the suburbs and the city gathering together around Jesus. And so some of this multi-everything, intergenerational church, multi-socioeconomic educational backgrounds, and that just creates some beauty, some challenge for pastoring. But I've been here now for 15 years, almost 16 years, and it's been a beautiful thing, beautiful community to be a part of. Part of what God's doing now, I mean, we're just trying to lean in even more deeply to the life of discipleship and spiritual formation as a church, being a little more intentional about that, not just having people present, but having people kind of continue on their spiritual journey step by step, encouraging that along the way. And we've also seen kind of a generational change at our church. Some of those founders of the church are, getting older. Some of them are dying. And so how do we empower the next generation of the church to step up? We've seen a huge influx of young families over the last few years.
That's great.
And so we're really trying to help people take steps forward. So yeah, it's been a great place, not without our own challenges. I mean, any pastor who's listening knows every church is not perfect. We've got a ton of our own challenges, but it's been a great place to be a pastor for the last 15 years.
What are some things you're seeing, as you mentioned, like a focus on formation and discipleship? What seems to be bearing fruit, these days from what you're noticing? I think that's a question I get a lot, and people are really exploring. It seems like God is stirring up something new. We've kind of pivoted away from a lot of the, helping people be present in our, services, that attractional model, to
Mhm.
something deeper. And just curious, there are things you're beginning to see kind of bud and start to bloom and bear fruit.
I mean, I think we're seeing, like you mentioned, this. There's a curiosity about faith. At the same time as we see nationally that the church is in decline, I think we're still seeing a lot of people coming in with questions who are not followers of Jesus. They're showing up because they're curious about who is Jesus. They don't know the story. They may be coming with a spouse who is following the Lord, but yeah. So just a lot of fruitfulness, I think, around speaking the message in ways that people who have no background in the church or anything are just open to. It's all fresh. We've just had some wonderful conversations. I'll have a conversation. I think of one individual who has shown up with a spouse at our church, who is just very open with me. Hey, I don't really believe this. I'm not sure what I believe, but I love your messages. Let's keep talking after the services. We have a couple different alpha groups that we run at different times during the year, and we've seen a lot of curious people from around the world with our setting stepping into that. So that's one thing that we're seeing.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's maybe a little bit of a challenge, but I think is an opportunity, is I think people have lost faith in institutions,
Yeah.
and then also after the pandemic, really hard to they're slow to get engaged. And so I would say we're grappling with engagement at the church, but also seeing that as when people do step in, they're really in. It just takes a little bit longer maybe than we would have seen in the past. So we're kind of wrestling with that, and also seeing people really take steps along that journey and the pathway. of discipleship to get engaged once they're really in.
Yeah, we're noticing a lot of similar things. I think even on our journey, I was hoping to go really deep with even fewer people. And then you just see this influx of folks that come and they have almost no background, but they're driving by the church and feeling something that's almost like God just tapping them on the shoulder, telling them to come. And so we're doing a lot of conversing though too. I think I loved how you mentioned conversation, because I think sometimes we're looking for that next sort of silver bullet ministry strategy that's going to be the next latest thing. But so much of, I think, even the work we're going to talk about for how you pastor, and thinking about Eugene Peterson in particular, how he would encourage pastors to pastor is to listen, to teach God's word, and to pray. And it sounds like you guys are just doing a lot of good listening and conversing as well. But you think about Peterson, I was certainly intrigued. When I was doing my doctor of ministry work, I did it through the Dallas Willard Research Center, but there was a big part of me after I'd hopped into that program, saw, oh my goodness, there's now stuff with Eugene Peterson at Western Seminary. I was feeling a little bit of that FOMO of, oh, that would be pretty cool. And you hopped in it. So talk a little bit about that and the influence Peterson has had in your life, because I think that will be something that shapes your book and the work that God's really called you to beyond, in and through and beyond Eastbrook these days.
Yeah, I feel the same thing, because when you talked about your work with Willard, I think these are two of my big heroes, Dallas Willard and Eugene Peterson. I mean, my first exposure to Peterson, probably like a lot of people, was really through the Message, and then became a doorway into some of his spiritual writings that more generally, like A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. I think everybody references that, but that book on the Psalms of Ascent is still pivotal for me.
Oh yeah.
And of course, then as I began exploring ministry, I had a mentor who just encouraged me to read through Peterson's pastoral library, books like Working the Angles and Under the Unpredictable Plant. And when I read those things, it just revolutionized my way of thinking. And I was wrestling with it at the time when I was reading that. I was at a church that was a little bit smaller, more incarnational. And then I ended up being a college pastor at a church that was really like a mega church setting. And I wasn't sure how could the Petersonian vision connect with where I was at. And I wrestled with that for a long time. I was in that role for 5 years and then sent out to be part of a church planting team. And I just began to be disillusioned with some of the stuff I was doing and the kind of circles in which I was finding myself. It wasn't that I didn't want to see people come to Christ. I just didn't believe that the way we were leading them to Christ was something that would lead to life in the end in their long journey. And so that's when I kind of really went into a rethinking of my whole ministry frameworks and returned probably again wholeheartedly to Peterson's writings and the things that he talks about, like you said, conversation, prayer. The pastor is a spiritual director, preaching the word in a way that is both insightful and deep, but also leads to engagement with God, spiritual formation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's just so much inside of that. And being part of the Peterson Center, some of the first Doctor of Ministry cohorts that they started there, was a huge privilege. And I'm incredibly grateful to all those who got that going. I think of Wynn Collier, who is a friend and leader of what's going on with the Peterson Center there at Western Seminary. And it's just a great work that they're doing there.
Yeah. Yeah. He's an incredible writer too. His biography on Peterson, A Burning in My Bones, is just phenomenal.
So good.
And he wrote a beautiful foreword to your book. So let's talk a little bit about the pastor as gardener. I mean, I think of images of pastor in our culture that people really gravitate toward. I think about pastor as leader predominantly. That seems to be, your success as a pastor is how much you're running, buildings, budgets, people in the pews or seats. And pastor as gardener, I think, is a subversive image. So talk a little bit about this book. Why did you write it? What do you hope people glean from this? How this might shape pastors and shape parishioners?
Yeah, well, the book really originally came out of my wrestling and my questions that I was just mentioning and trying to regain my footing. And some of it was even the COVID years and what does it look like? What's pastoral ministry really look like. I started going back to some of the great authors like Gregory the Great's Pastoral Care and John Chrysostom on the priesthood and other things like that. And what I started to realize was that the predominant images I was probably living out, even unconsciously, like the leader, um, that it wasn't working for me anymore. And so then I began searching for things and really came into this image in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6, where Paul says, I was a church planter before Paul says these things. I planted, Apollos watered, but God is the one who gives the growth. And yeah, as a church planter, you're like, yeah, Paul planted. And then I think we unwittingly live out, and I'm the one who's going to give the growth. And I realized this image of gardening really decentered the pastor, decentered the church planter, and really put God in the center of that. And so I used that verse as kind of a doorway into the biblical imagination around agrarian imagery, and it helped me rethink some things. So the pastor as gardener really made me pay attention to the environment. What's the environment in which we're doing things in North America? It made me pay attention to the soil. Peterson talks about the congregation as soil, but I also thought about some of the background in our culture on soil of what is the church, trying to pay attention to my own local church. What is the history? What's the geography of this place in which I live in Milwaukee? And how has that shaped in a different way than you out in the Northeast? You know, it's a different geography. There's a different soil.
Yeah.
So paying attention to those things, and then some of the practices that are time tested. Wendell Berry became a little bit of a guide there. And how do we get back to some of the practices of pastoral ministry that are time tested, not just the fads? And then how do we be part of community? How do we pay attention to seasons? I mean, I'm giving you a lot of the kind of the chapters of my book, but it really just helped me have a different imagination. It renewed my imagination for how I was doing ministry. And there's so much in each part of that that has really helped me and grounded me in just a different approach.
Yeah. Yeah, reading through your book, I saw, speaking of like the environment in which you do ministry, you get into Charles Taylor's work, A Secular Age, which it's one of those books I wish I can say I have read cover to cover, but haven't.
So tough.
Yeah, but so valuable. A lot of those really key phrases, you give a nice little overview of that. But talk about what's the soil that we're called to be the church in, like from our cultural environment and moment that you see that presents both challenges and invitations for growth, not just for pastors but people belonging to the church. What are some of the, I don't know, key perspectives you have from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Taylor is helpful in a lot of ways. Maybe he's a little overused now, but I still think his fundamental ideas about enchantment and disenchantment, the social imaginary that it's different than a worldview, but it's this pervasive approach to how we live. And I think what's helpful about that is just to realize that there's certain things that are taken for granted that we don't even see. It's, again, might be overused, but it's the water we swim in as fish. And what's helpful for me about that is to name some things that also we feel as tensions inside of ourselves as pastors.
Hmm.
We walk into a hospital to pray with someone and we feel like the medical staff is glad we're there, but sees us as kind of secondary, like we're like off to the side because we live in a disenchanted time. So people, do they really believe that there's God or divine? Well, at least the pastor will help this person calm down, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not everybody's approach. I'm not saying that about all medical personnel. I'm just saying that those are kind of the places we show up. We're asked to give a prayer at a school event, because that would be a nice thing to do. But do people really believe we're invoking the awesome presence of the Holy God? And so how do we be aware of that and then engage as pastors in a different way? Andy Root, who's written a lot about the secular age and pastoral ministry, has some great insights that I think connect with what Taylor talks about at a little more close to the ground level. And the funny thing that Andy Root does in his book, The Pastor in the Secular Age, he basically brings it back to Peterson and the place of prayer.
Hmm.
And I just think there's a profound there's a profoundness to prayer. I've never had somebody refuse prayer, no matter where I'm at, no
Mm,
matter where they're coming from. Even folks who are of different religious backgrounds have been totally comfortable with me praying over them after a church service or in a hospital. And I think that is a pretty important, even recognition that we live in a disenchanted age, and yet everybody is longing. We're haunted, Taylor says,
mm,
by this longing for the divine that we're not sure we believe in. And I think this is what's connecting with the people who are coming to our churches. You're talking about it. I've heard other guests on your podcast talk about it. We're seeing people who know they're longing for that. And amidst the church in decline, amidst the disenchantment, there's still this God haunted atmosphere that people can't escape. And as pastors, we can sort of stand in that place and say, yes, there is something. Let's enter into conversation with that
mm.
being. And I think it's powerful. But it's good to be aware of the setting in which we find ourselves, not to be ignorant of it.
Yeah, so we need to know the setting and kind of the state of the soil of the world around us, and then, when maybe even individually, we need to know this in our own hearts. If God is the ultimate kind of gardener, and I remember one of my favorite seminary lessons that I heard from a podcast guest here, Howard Baker. He talked about the parable of the four soils, and he suggested that oftentimes as Christians, we think if we've made a profession of faith, then we're the good soil, and that's kind of impermeable. Like we're always going to be the good soil. That doesn't change. That doesn't shift. But he suggested perhaps every single day, the state of our heart could put us in one of those four categories of the rocky soil, or the path, or the thorns, or the
Mm,
good soil. And so I think about that metaphor. It just makes me think about what is the soil of my heart, today. And then pastorally, I tend to think about what's the state of the soil of someone's heart as well. And
mm,
sometimes, like, I think we get in trouble as human beings and even as ministry leaders when we try to plant good seeds on bad soil.
mhm.
I say the seed's got to fall in good soil. And someone's like, why don't you just go talk and tell this to this person right now? I was like, I don't think they are in a position at all to receive what is going to be said. And the fact, if I actually say it, it might make them more hardened to hear what they actually
Right.
need to hear. So it's amazing how just intuitively, I think a lot of this agricultural gardening sort of metaphors come into play. Maybe
Mhm.
what would you say? I know a lot of people here listening might be pastors, probably most aren't, but how do you be a part of a church and be a person? If the pastor's the gardener, then we're part of the garden. And I guess, what are some ways this plays out for an average person, Matt?
Yeah, I think it connects even with that image. I love how you were talking about the mentor or the professor who spoke about we can actually become some of the four different types of soils in that parable of Jesus. It reminds me also of this concept of seasons. And I think, for somebody who's listening, who's not a pastor, is just thinking, what does this mean for me? I would encourage thinking about seasons in sort of two different ways, because I think this connects with that way of thinking about the parable of the soils. A lot of people will talk about seasons of our life, like go back to the beginning of your life, think of the different chapters of your spiritual journey. And I think that's really, really valuable work. What season of life are you in? Some of it's age. I just turned 50 this last year. So, that sort of brings all these different things into people's minds about, well, what's ahead of me? What's behind me? And so I would encourage when we're in a congregation and we're thinking about our spiritual life to identify in the past what seasons have we been in, and then also what season might we be in right now. Now, another way to think of this is not just in terms of our whole life journey, kind of like stages of faith. Fowler talks about this, or Robert Clinton talks about it in the Making of a Leader, about those kind of stages in terms of seasons, but also in the course of a year. When we think about our experience of seasons, we experience times of great growth in the spring of our life, summer, kind of a fullness or a radiance. And then there's the the pruning and the decreasing of the fall or the autumn when the leaves start to drop off the
Mm.
trees. And then there's winter we experience. Man, I'm in Milwaukee right now. I don't know what it's like for you, but the winters in Milwaukee are brutal,
It's
you know?
here. It is here.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I had a mentor one time tell me I was going through an extraordinarily difficult time in my spiritual life. And he said, "You're in a winter right now. Stop trying to open the earth. Stop trying to jam seeds down. Um, let it be fallow, enter into the silence, and believe that there's subterranean work going on, even though you can't see it." Oh man, that was so freeing for me. And so I think even thinking through in the course of a year of our life, what are the different seasons of the spiritual life we might experience? Where are the places where we're experiencing abundant growth? Where are the places where we're experiencing just the radiance of fullness? Where are the places where we're feeling sort of a decrease or things being pulled away? And where is it just hard, quiet, still? Um, those things, I think, for anybody, it doesn't have to be a pastor, can be really helpful. For pastors, I think thinking about our congregations in those ways actually also can be helpful. But yeah, that sort of twofold work, the whole spectrum or kind of linear approach to seasons, and then the kind of annual approach to seasons has really helped me stop forcing things in my spiritual life sometimes, savor things sometimes, rest sometimes. And I'm not apt to do those things naturally. I kind of just keep pushing. And that's just it's not life giving.
Yeah, that is so good, Matt. I'm encouraged to hear some of those things. And if I remember at the end of the book, you kind of liken our moment as a church to a little bit of a winter, if I'm
Yep.
remembering correctly. Why would you say we're in a winter now? And then you kind of touched on some of those themes, but how might we really lean into this season rather than maybe resist it? Because
Hmm.
at least for us here in New England, winter is beautiful at Christmas, and then I mean we are just enduring and dying for spring. You know, so but in the Christian life, we shouldn't try and get through a season sooner than maybe God would have for us. So,
Hmm.
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Milwaukee's the same as you. You know, you get past Christmas, and then it's just like try to make the most. Try to make the most of the winter. But everybody's just saying, "Man, I can't wait till the green starts to come and the snow starts to melt." Yeah, the reason I think we're in a winter right now in the church in North America is because statistically the church is in decline. Statistically, the greatest growing religious affiliation are those who are non-religiously affiliated. And then also we experience it too, like we're experiencing right now this tension within the church where it feels like the church has been co-opted by certain things even more than by Christ. We're co-opted by different agendas. I'm not even trying to make a political statement. I'm just saying across different spectrums, it feels as if the church has been disoriented and doesn't know who it is anymore. And I
Mm,
think I actually am seeing that, as hard as it is for me to say it and to live it sometimes, I'm seeing that as an invitation from the Lord for the church in North America to enter into the winter. And I see some resonance there with exile, some resonance there
mm,
with going into the wilderness to meet with the Lord. I mean, that great theme in the Old Testament of the wilderness, which is a form of winter, I think, being the place where you will be brought back to your first love, where you'll be brought back to real encounter with God. That's what I'm discerning right now about what that means. How do we do that? I think in some ways it may be a time of stripping away of things in our spiritual lives or even in the church, of coming back to first things, of letting the Lord, this sounds a little harsh, but letting the Lord kill some things that shouldn't be kept on life support anymore in the church in North America. What are the specific
mm,
things? I'm not sure I even know, but I'm praying
mm,
about that in our own congregation. I'm looking around and saying what just needs to lie fallow, and we'll see what springs up. Um, there's a beautiful story that kind of a parable book called The Man Who Planted Trees, which I sort of have little excerpts from at the beginning of each chapter. And that book, which is not a Christian book, is just a beautiful picture about planting in hope of the future, even though you may not see it in the present moment or even in your lifetime. And I really firmly believe that the church in North America, we are in a season of winter and then planting. And for some of us who are believers in this generation, we may not see the growth in our lifetime, but we need to plant the right crop. We need to aim for the future and live in hope that God is faithful and he will do the work. But we'll plant, we'll water. God's the one who will bring the growth.
Amen. Wow, that's beautifully said. And your words are reminding me of one of my favorite lines from Wendell Berry, who, again, a good influence on Peterson and your work, but plant sequoias. Um, they're so beautiful. It take hundreds of years to form, but boy, people hundreds of years from now, what are the things they will be grateful we planted today? Even 30 years from now, 20 years from now, what will people then? I think a lot about my oldest son has had a lot of interest in ministry, and he's just late elementary school aged, and I sometimes think if he was going to take over a lead pastor role somewhere 20, 25 years from now, what will he have hoped I would have done during this leg of the journey where the baton's been passed to us? And a lot of that is kind of the I must decrease, God must increase. And it does feel like a stooping down, sort of a lessening to get down in the dirt and plant a seed and trust it'll be watered and continue to water it and believe God will bring the growth. So
I love that picture.
yeah.
With your son. I love you thinking about it that way, Dave. That's just so, it makes it very tangible too. I think a lot of the work of the planting and the developing is in the people.
Yeah.
Who are the people, the saplings in a sense God has put around us. And that's true not just for pastors, that's true of anybody following Jesus. Who are the people who are just starting to grow, and how do we help them grow in ways that are life-giving and not be malformed by some of the dominant images of the Christian life or the ministry life that are just dead ends.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think ultimately this work is, as a gardener, is something that is reflective of God himself, and how he begins obviously in Genesis with a garden, and we kind of see that garden emerge into a city in Revelation. But one of the texts I'm glad you address in the book is the resurrection account where I think it's Mary's at the tomb, and Jesus isn't there, but he kind of is, and she mistakes Jesus for being a gardener. And I'd love to say, what does that say about who God is? Kind of a running theme we've had in this podcast is like that A.W. Tozer idea that what comes to mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And we need to have our operating image of God kind of healed in a lot of ways. But I think there's something that should be drawn out, and I'm glad you do it, about thinking about Jesus as gardener and him being mistaken as that in his resurrected state. Could you share some more about that? What's going on there?
Man, I love that. I just think, John's gospel, if there, I don't want to say something that's heretical, but if there's any gospel where things are not put in by accident, it's John's gospel.
Yeah.
And I trust that there's no part of scripture that's by accident with God's hand, but you just see the intentionality of the way that gospel is written and structured. And so I think that what's happening in that gospel text is a very intentional reference back to the Genesis garden. And this redemption work, yes, Jesus has come to bring salvation and to renew the creation. But it's beginning with him being the seed that is planted in the earth. He's raised up on the cross, and then he's planted in the ground. And now as he resurrection breaks forth, he's doing a new gardening work. And that gardening work is going to be in the lives of people. And so there's no person who is not a potential seed or a place where gospel seeds can be planted at the same time. Jesus is seeing people as all potential, in a sense, of what God can do in their lives. He he's looking at the world and inviting people into it alongside of him to be part of his great new gardening work, the redemption that's coming. And N.T. Wright had an old article where he said, Easter has come, go plant a tree. It's a kind of funny article in a sense, but I think one aspect of that is there's a redemption happening. There's a
Hmm.
redemption happening, and it touches lives, it touches the world. It connects with the creation mandate. It connects with, obviously, the Great Commission to go and make disciples, and that there's this nurturing, cultivating work that Jesus is doing in the world. And so I think that also helps when we think about spiritual formation type of work. We're not just here to make converts. We're here to make disciples
Amen.
who, as Willard says so much, are going to know and understand everything that Jesus has taught, and then to live as formed Christians, little Christs. And this is developmental work. So there's this long perspective, I think, that Jesus has, that he knows he's starting a movement that's going to touch the
Hmm.
world. But it is this new great gardening movement, and it's hope filled, it's restorative, it's come
Hmm.
to bring life to people, not crush them with burdens like the Pharisees. So, yeah, just so much inside of that. But I think John's intentionally connecting it with the Genesis garden imagery. It's starting again. It's a restart.
Hmm. Yeah. I love how you talk about God looking at us with all potential. And from this whole process, and we've done a lot of deep work into this and living from the overflow, and I think this writing is coming from that overflow. What's your life like with God these days?
Mm.
And we love to talk about people's experience with God. Like what's that like? And I think for a lot of us we can be closed off to this, or maybe don't feel like this is available to me. You guys are pastors, so of course you have like a closer lifeline to God, but I think we all encounter God differently. But what's your experience with God like now these days, Matt, from all this work that you've been
Mm.
doing, being rooted and thinking about how God is gardening in your life? What's that like for you?
Man, I was in such a hurry, Dave, so much of my life, not just to do ministry, so much in a hurry to get God's purposes worked out in me. I don't know if anybody else listening is going to relate to that. I wanted to be like right where God wanted me to be all the time, but I was like almost pressing further, and sometimes was pretty discontent with where I was.
Hmm.
And I think there's a good part of like discontent in the sense of, I don't know if I'd use that word, but the longing to continue to grow. But I just feel like so much of my life, maybe I have been trying to force what God wanted to do. And so there's a piece of my experience of this now, which is a little bit of a relaxation into God.
Hmm.
Um, it's not that I'm not intentional. I mean, I'm still waking up in the morning, spending time in scripture and prayer. My life is still percolated with, hopefully abiding prayer or practicing the presence all through the day if I can, by God's grace. But there's just a sense that I can relax into the hands of the great gardener. And that's brought me, at my best moments, I'll say, it's brought me just a sense of trust and peace. I think another thing that I've been experiencing in a different way is silence. Part of this has been linked up with, I mentioned before, this time of a great winter, probably could have been described as a dark night of the soul, where my words kind of ran out.
Hmm.
And at first, I viewed that as a frustration, and then it really became a gift. So lingering in silence with God without having to say anything, or just letting my words be just a few words, maybe the Jesus prayer, or aspects of the Lord's prayer, or just simple welcoming words with the Lord. All of those things have just kind of slowed me down to be more receptive and to listen more. And I think another subset of it that, again, I struggle with, and I think our culture leads us into this struggle, is the struggle of control. Man, as a
Hmm.
pastor, I just want to make things happen. I was I was a church planter before, I was working with college students. We're all action oriented, and And I think, yeah, I've come into a place now where I'm trying to let go of my control even more
Hmm.
and trust that God is shaping things, even when it feels like things are going away from what seems like God's purposes. Maybe that's in a life of someone I love, or maybe it's in a congregant, or maybe it's in the culture. Trusting that God is at work and trying to discern some of those things. Yeah, so I think my prayer life has deepened, although maybe not in the way I would have envisioned maybe 10 years ago.
Wow.
A lot more silence, a lot more um, trust and stillness.
Wow. Yeah, your words remind me. We were talking about Peterson and Willard a little bit there, but that beautiful line from the message of Peterson's living in the unforced
Mhm.
rhythms of grace. And then Dallas said, probably, I share this with our church staff a lot, but he talked about, isn't this fascinating? The kingdom of God is often likened to that of a seed. And
Mhm.
there's not much we can really do to make a seed grow by direct effort. And so Dallas would kind of say that if we can't make these things grow on our own, then we simply just need to be with God, teach lovingly, listen and be with people, and then kind of let go of the outcomes. Trust that
Mm.
God will bring the growth, and He will, and that means we can relax. And I think Dallas gave that famous description that Jesus was the most relaxed person to ever walk the face of the earth. And so I'm encouraged for you, Matt, that you're kind of getting to experience, I think, that in a
Mm.
interesting season of life. And I resonate too with finding myself having less wordy prayers. I mean, our world is just inundated with words right now that you're almost tired from it. And
Mhm.
I found it fascinating. A musical artist I've loved for years is John Mark McMillan, and he's kind of taking a break from music. But I heard him say that now he's just listening to a lot of instrumental music as almost a way of being healed from all of the words that he's assaulted with every single day all around him. And
Hmm.
so just love what you're experiencing and
Beautiful.
sharing and giving us a rich invitation to perhaps believe it's possible for everyone listening here today. I long for that too. But
Yeah.
as we kind of wrap up, I would just be honored if you would just take a moment to maybe help us experience a little bit of that rest, or however the Lord might just lead you to lead us in a prayer that we might be able to draw just a little bit closer to Him as our conversation wraps up.
I love that, Dave. Yeah, I love this rhythm of your podcast. So I'm just going to invite everybody who's listening. You can just close your eyes if you're comfortable, and as long as you're not driving.
Hmm.
And also just invite you to take a deep breath, just to still yourself down, and just to remember in this moment that the living God, the triune God, is here, and His thoughts toward us in this moment are good. And so, as we're in this place, in this posture, just quieted down a little bit, I'd just like to lead us in a simple prayer, reflecting some of these themes. Living God, would you please take our lives in your hands like a seed and plant us deep in the soil of who you are? May we sink down into the current of your love, that love which is beyond any comprehension. And saturated in your life and in your love, Lord, would you do a fresh work in our lives? May we become like what it says in Psalm 1, trees planted by streams of water. Would you bring forth fruit in its appropriate season, Lord, in us? No matter what's happening around us personally or in our world, Lord, may the leaves of the trees of our lives never wither. And may you bring forth true prospering, true abundance for your glory, for our goodness. May our roots go down deep, Lord, in you. And as you do all of these things in us and with us, may you also bring forth from us fruit that would nourish those around us, that they too might taste and see that you are good. We trust you for this, Lord. And we pray this in the name of the Father, and in the name of the Son, and in the name of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Matt. And if you're looking for Matt's book, The Pastor's Gardener, comes out on March 24th, 2026, and we're excited for that. And want to hear more of Matt's teachings, you can go to Eastbrook Church there in Milwaukee and listen online. And Matt, what's the best way for people to connect with you and in your work?
Sure. Probably the best way is to visit my website, mwerickson.com. You can find out information about the book there. You can follow on with some other things. I also have a podcast that's connected to the book a little bit called Field Notes for Pastors. That's running from January through March 2026. We'll see if I do any more after that or not. So those are the best places to follow on, and you can, order the book anywhere. If somebody does pre-order the book, I've got some resources that I'll send you ahead of time, and you can find those again through the website. But super grateful for you, Dave. I love what you're doing.
Thanks.
You're one of those pastors. When I met you first, right away, I just thought, okay, this is a person I'd love to journey with, and I'm really benefiting from the podcast and your book, and you're a great pastor. So thanks. Keep doing what you're doing.
Hey, well, I appreciate that. And thank you so much, Matt. And I'm excited to check out that new podcast. And just a big word of appreciation to everyone listening here today. And I just been praying that you will continue to walk in and experience these unforced rhythms of grace. Look forward to being with you next time. Thank you again, Matt. God bless everybody. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Deeper Experiences with God. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who might find it helpful. You can find more episodes and show notes at podcast.daveripper.com.